I think that his shyness combined with his stammer were interpreted as weak-mindedness or even stupidity, which, as history proved, are extremely, wildly unfair judgments. His, not just his performance, I think, as the kind of leader he was, I think shows that he had a great deal of strength, actually. There was something utterly rigorous in his devotion to what he saw to be his duty. I think the premise alone is pretty compelling. I mean, the idea of this unlikely relationship between a man who lives in this very lonely and rarefied existence and a man he's very unlikely to meet under any other circumstances. You know, he's one of the commoners. You don't spend that much time with somebody. You know, if you're the king or the Duke of York, it's unlikely that you spend that much intimate time with somebody who is not of your class. So it's an unlikely friendship, and that's what the crux of it is, really. It's a friendship between a man who is suffering not only from a speech impediment, but from the weight of an enormous task that he didn't expect to have to perform. Oh, he's quite fantastic in that he never lets an obvious choice get through. He didn't want it to be about a stiff member of the royal family and a crass Aussie who has no idea how to behave. Which, you know, you could sort of make a kind of comic dynamic if you wanted to, out of the, you know, Crocodile Dundee meets the Duke of York. And he wasn't interested in that. He made Lionel much more textured. He made him vulnerable. He gave him very slightly mixed motives. Rather than being completely unimpressed with the prestige of his client, he made him a little bit impressed. But not enough for that to be his driving force, just enough to make him complex. He gave Logue a real thoughtfulness and warmth, which made it feel very easy for me, really. I've known Helena a very tiny bit for a very long time, and she's fun, and she's quite filthy. She's outrageous. Sadly, she's supposed to be playing someone who's very supportive of me. She finds that quite difficult. Whenever I'm stammering, if I catch her eye, she's usually looking at her watch or yawning, hoping that the moment passes as quickly as possible. Fortunately, when the camera's on her, she looks delightfully supportive. And I got stuck in a lift with her the other day, with the camera operator. And if I had to choose somebody to get stuck in a lift with, actually, she comes fairly high on the list, because she's amusing, attractive, and very small.
He got into speech therapy because during the First World War he started to work a lot with soldiers returning to Australia from the front in Europe who were suffering shell shock and were kind of locked vocally. And I think he was learning very much by the seat of his pants that he knew a lot about, you know, anatomy and muscle therapy and breathing and exercises and things like that, but he kind of pioneered an almost psychotherapeutic approach, that he knew the problem was not simply a physical one, that there was something mostly around the age of 4 or 5, some kind of trauma within the child that creates stammering. The role has enormous dimension and a lot of texture to it, because it's the journey towards becoming a king or becoming a human being in a funny sort of way, and watching someone wrestle with a defect or an impediment that they've lived with since childhood, and conquering that is like conquering some other disorder like anxiety or something. It's not something that goes away overnight. You've really got to commit to it and work very hard to control it and accept it and release yourself in a way. And watching him do that has been beautiful, heartbreaking, very powerful, and very poignant, and he's just found this extraordinary variation of, depending on who he's with as a character, how debilitating or how frustrating the level of stammering can become.
I played a Queen Mother, Elizabeth. Immediately you get the image of the 101-year-old. I'm playing her sort of in her earlier years, in the 19th. It sort of stems, I never know because it changes every day, but 1925 to about 39. Well, definitely 39 because it's the outbreak of war. So she's had her children, well, not 25, but it's those years. So it's the younger-ish Elizabeth. It was her role in this story is that it was really she found Lionel Logue, who was the speech therapist who fundamentally helped my husband, George, or Bertie, with his stammer. And it was her, I think it was her initiative through her initiative that they met. It's a very personal, emotional point of view, intimate, on something that was actually huge and was a massive national and international, impact. And it's still famous historically, the abdication of Edward VIII. And also, I don't think people quite. I know my father's generation knew about the stammer. I don't think people of this generation really do. They're surprised and they're fascinated to know that, and the pressure he was under and the dilemma. I think anyone who's had, it's a fascinating story, and how also he was helped by this other man, and it's ultimately about a real genuine friendship, and how this man was really made by this other man too. He couldn't have done it without the wife, of course, but then also, and it was her idea, and her initiation, but then without Lionel Logue. So it's very moving, it's very funny, and they're both such attractive and appealing but vulnerable men too.
I don't think I ever would have wanted to tell the abdication story straight. I mean, other filmmakers have done it. I think to an English audience it's quite familiar. And I think what fascinated me was being able to tell this one of the great 20th century stories, but through an unlikely and unusual prism. And the great thing about telling it through the prism of Bertie and Lionel Logue's relationship is that it cuts at the heart of the fear about the new king, which is that, is he up to the job? And, I was reading the other day a tabloid newspaper report from the 1930s about their relationship, and it talks about the fact that there was a genuine fear that he wouldn't be able to survive as king, that he would do it so badly that you'd have the abdication with one king stepping down, and within a couple of years the next king steps down because he's not up to it either. So it's difficult to imagine now when we look back, because we think of him as the king who took us through the Second World War, to imagine that there was that vulnerability. And it's through the Logue relationship that you uncover this incredible suspense and tension about whether he could step up to the mark. He has a very incredible brain. He's a very clever man. So his command of the subject and Bertie's story was pretty formidable by the time we started shooting, and I thought he brings a wonderful specificity to the role. His body language, the way he speaks. He studied the way Bertie stammered very, very carefully. We took advice about speech therapists about how to capture it. His diffidence. He really inhabits it in a way that's very, very strong. And I think Colin is by nature quite he's quite a minimalist actor, and it's kind of interesting when you confront a minimalist actor with a role like this, because you can't be minimalist about stammering. You have to take it on. It's been great to get Colin to really to go for capturing something which you can't do by half measures, and I think he's risen to the challenge, and I think it's a truly great performance. I go to the cinema to be moved, and this film is a real tearjerker, I think, in more than one place, and it combines with that humour, it combines with that a terrific yarn. The story of the abdication is an incredibly impactful story, and then the coming of the Second World War to top that gives the film a great climax, and you're also getting the chance to see in one movie one of the greatest collections of sort of living actors I think you could get together in a movie in terms of British actors, and Australian actors. I think it offers a lot to the cinema audience, and on top of that, you have the opportunity to see Britain before the war, maybe in a way you haven't seen before. I think I hope it offers a very original take on the look of Britain as we came into the Second World War.